The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Jalen Dawson stepped forward. The weight of 1,000 skeptical eyes pressed down on him. At just 19, standing against seasoned legal professionals, he looked out of place, a child among giants. The judge, Judge Marshall, leaned forward, adjusting his glasses with a smirk. "Mr. Dawson, do you even understand what's at stake here? This isn't some school debate." His tone dripped with condescension. Jalen swallowed his nerves. He knew this judge didn't take him seriously. Neither did the prosecutor, Mr. Langley, who was already flipping through his notes, waiting to tear him apart. "This court doesn't have time for theatrics," Judge Marshall continued. "Are you sure you don't want to call a real attorney?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The spectators, lawyers, reporters, even members of the jury, shared amused glances. They expected a short, humiliating trial for the arrogant kid who thought he could take on the legal system. Jalen's jaw clenched. He refused to let them break him. He turned toward the jury, his voice steady but firm. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I don't need another attorney. I have everything I need to prove my case." The laughter faded. There was something in his voice, something that hinted at certainty. Judge Marshall raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." He gestured toward Langley. "Proceed." And so the battle began. Langley rose, clearing his throat. His confidence was palpable. He had years of experience. This kid, just another defendant who thought he was smarter than the system. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langley began, pacing in front of the jury. "This case is simple. Mr. Dawson was found at the scene of the crime. The evidence is overwhelming." He walked toward a table, where a folder lay open. He lifted a photograph and held it up. "This is Mr. Dawson at the location 20 minutes before the crime was committed." The jury studied the image. Jalen remained motionless, waiting. Langley smirked and pulled out another piece of paper. "And here, we have the testimony of a witness who places him near the area at the exact time of the incident." Judge Marshall glanced at Jalen. Still confident, Jalen didn't blink. He let the tension rise, the weight of the evidence pressing against him like a vice. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I hope you have more than that, Mr. Langley." The courtroom stilled. Langley frowned. "Excuse me." Jalen tilted his head. "Because if that's your best evidence, this trial is over before it begins." Langley scoffed. "You think you can dismantle my case, boy?" Jalen folded his hands behind his back, stepping forward. His presence shifted. He wasn't just a teenager anymore. He was something more. "Your Honor, may I approach the witness stand?" Jalen asked. Judge Marshall waved a hand. "Let's see where this goes." Jalen turned toward the prosecution's key witness, a middle-aged man named Travis Hodge. The man fidgeted slightly under Jalen's sharp gaze. "You testified that you saw me at the scene at exactly 8:45 p.m. Jalen asked. Hodge nodded. "Yes, and you're absolutely sure?" I think so." Jalen smiled faintly. "Fascinating. Because according to traffic camera footage, my car didn't even arrive in that area until 8:50 p.m. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Langley's face stiffened. "Objection." Judge Marshall held up a hand. "Overruled." His interest was piqued. "Continue." Jalen turned back to the witness. "You wouldn't happen to be the same Travis Hodge who has a history of false testimonies, would you?" Hodge's face blanched. Langley quickly flipped through his notes, but it was too late. Jalen reached into his bag and pulled out documents. "Here are 2 prior cases where Mr. Hodge conveniently identified the wrong suspect. One of those men spent 4 years in prison before the truth came out." Hodge's hands shook. The courtroom erupted. Judge Marshall leaned forward. "Mr. Langley, what is the meaning of this?" Langley scrambled to recover, but the damage was done. Jalen looked directly at the jury. If the prosecution's key witness is unreliable, then what does that say about the rest of their case? Silence. Judge Marshall stared at Jalen for a long moment. "Proceed with your defense, Mr. Dawson." Jalen's smirk widened. Langley was losing control. His case was unraveling fast. He needed to regain ground, fast. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "Forget the witness. Let's talk about the security footage." He turned to the screen as a grainy video began playing. "This footage places Dawson near the crime scene. You claim you weren't there at the time. Explain this." Jalen watched the footage carefully. He had already seen it a dozen times. He knew exactly where the flaw was. He looked at the judge. "Can I request the court pause the video at exactly 10 seconds in?" Judge Marshall nodded. The screen froze. Jalen pointed. "Notice the timestamp?" Langley glanced at it. "Yes." 8:45 p.m. Incorrect, Jalen corrected, his voice sharp. It says 8:45 p.m., but the time format is off by 3 minutes. I cross-checked this footage with the original file. The real timestamp should say 8:42 p.m., before I even entered the area. Langley's face fell. The realization spread across the room like a wildfire. The evidence was mislabeled. Judge Marshall's jaw tightened. He turned toward Langley, his once mocking gaze now deadly serious. Mr. Langley, explain yourself. Langley sputtered, but no words came. Jalen's voice cut through the silence. This entire case is built on assumptions, misjudgments, and unreliable witnesses. The prosecution wanted a conviction, not justice. The courtroom erupted again. Judge Marshall sat back, stroking his chin. For the first time, he looked at Jalen not with amusement, but respect. He turned to the jury. Do we have a decision? The foreman stood. A tense silence filled the room. We do, Your Honor. Jalen took a deep breath. In the case of Jalen Dawson, the pause felt endless. We find the defendant not guilty. The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, stunned expressions filled the air. Jalen closed his eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over him. Judge Marshall let out a long breath before looking at Jalen. Mr. Dawson, he said, his voice softer now. I underestimated you. Jalen smiled. You're not the first. The judge chuckled, a genuine chuckle this time. You have a future in this, son. Jalen gathered his notes, glancing at Langley one last time. I know, he said simply. As he walked out of the courtroom, he wasn't just a teenager anymore. He was a force to be reckoned with.